Take this off you. So that's high.
Thank you.
Are we live with it?
Until we get a quorum, we'll go ahead and skip over anything that might have to be voted on, like the draft minutes. So let's move to the 2023 financial review.
All right, so go to the next slide, please. So in so
1.18.
yeah,
Gotcha.
So consistent with our experience for the previous 7 months, we have revenues that are below budget to the extent of about a little under $4 million. And we have operating expenditures that are favorable to budget by 3.4 million, primarily driven by it's headcount driven. As we mentioned in the prior, transportation maintenance administration headcounts are below budget. Maintenance is about 1 under, but even though we have some significant vacancies in the transportation sector, we're having a favorable volume variance offset by an unfavorable rate because in our adopted fiscal 23 budget, we did not contemplate the attendance incentives nor the shifted differential incentives in there. All in all, as we progress down through the other aspects of the spending, services is favorable about $340,000 on the budget, about 1.65 million. That's primarily the consulting studies, the transit strategic plan and ridership study that has not kicked off yet is the bulk of that favorableness. Materials and services consumed is favorable about $440,000. This has come down a little bit since last month, but primarily it's due to favorable fuels and lubricants. When we were putting the budget together in March of 22, that's when fuel was up around $5 a gallon. So we were expecting far worse than we are currently experiencing. So that's kind of a contributing factor to the favorableness there. But keeping an eye on it as the prediction of fuel prices going up in the summer, going back up. They're starting to creep up now, but maybe above $4 a gallon or so. Utilities is favorable to budget by about $35,000, so it's pretty spot on. Obviously, we'll be having an increase in electric as we come into the warmer months here. Casualties and liabilities are about favorable $415,000 to budget, but that's primarily at the end of the year. We do an actual analysis for unknown liabilities and so forth like that. That'll be booked at year end. Purchase transportation is favorable about 151,000. This is narrowing as for our response. So it looks like the demand is picking up, and all in all, there's no real items of concern in either the revenue stream or the expense side of the house. In this month here, in the month of February's closing, we did utilize PM Federal Flex 5307 funds in there, which generated, contributed the net operating position surplus of $3.895 million, where it was about $2.6 million for the 7 months ended January and 6 months ended December. We're putting together a comprehensive, and some of the items that we're going to talk about in the executive session, we're putting a comprehensive year forecast. As of this point, I think it will probably be anywhere between, let's say, where we are now to upwards of about $4.5 million or so surplus. So surplus. So with these operating statements here, also we have a strong cash position. We have $15.1 million, of which $11.1 million is in the operating accounts, and about $4 million in the capital cash account, which gives us to another opportunity we had spoke previously, and we got through the process today. In addition, for the CBTA money, we're investing it in the LGIP, and then what we're now putting on to kind of a double barrel approach, working through Wells Fargo. We're doing a sweep using their Treasury Plus product, which is currently in April about 435 basis points. So the way the program will work, you set a peg, and anything above that peg gets swept overnight and stays in there during that rate. And then if there's for some need, if you need to go above your pay, we'll automatically pull it back. So we'll maximize. So right now, we're going to probably between the CBTA transit fund account, the general checking account, and our capital cash accounts at Wells Fargo will be pushing in approximately about $19 million into the pegs, above the peg, the treasury costs or additional interest. So in addition to LGIP is, as you can show in here a little bit later. Joe, slide, is it 9? Yes. And here, this is the CBTA quarterly report through March. As you can see that just the time we actually have 4 receipts just because the December receipt was about 7 or 8 days late. So it hit in the month of January. So you can see the January interest income, there was about 50,000. The February interest income was about 54,000. And in the March LGIP, it was about 90,000. And we only have 1 month of negative shares. So basically that whole collection of this quarterly's activity offsets any of the unrealized losses that we experienced in the last 2 or 3 months. So this LGIP does have some components of a little bit longer. So I'm hoping that it will complement the Treasury Plus, which is a AAA rated product that has its investments primarily in the Treasury repurchase agreements and Treasury debt. So those are the 2 bases, about 84% repurchase agreements and 16% debt. It's AAA rated. It's an offspring product. So combination of the 2, taking advantage of the inverted yield curve, we should get some positive results for the next few months and about the operations income streams. So that's pretty much what transpired in year to date in February. Same story, and like I said, we're going to, as we discuss our other items, and as we pull together our full year forecast, we'll brief that in conjunction with our budget.
Tracking very much where we left it last, our call.
Yes. So I can hop into the next line item, which was our 2024 budget discussion. So there's no resolutions on that. So what we've come to, and we've gone through our internal reviews, and we presented kind of the draft footprint in January. So where we are now, and what our next steps would be, we're currently at a combined, base operating budget of around 74.1 million, and then in addition, we have about another 7.8 million that we're having to barrel, which are basically our future grant funded projects for expansion. So we want to separate so we don't confuse the baseline business with that. So you're going to see both 2 columns for 24. What our goal is we're putting together very similar last year. We're having the budget books. We're going to have the budget book available for circulation to the full board by the Tuesday's April 18th meeting. And then as agenda item in our May Finance Committee meeting, we can go through the budget book in depth. So you guys can ask questions, and then you can make a recommendation to the full board, and then still for May's meeting. If May's meeting, we need to field questions from the rest of the board members. We'll do that as well. And at that point, we'll also incorporate what we discussed during the executive session into our forecast, our full year forecast for 23 as well. So that's kind of our plan for the next 4 to 6 weeks. At that point, if you guys have any questions on that.
I don't, appreciate it. I'm good.
Is that a piece of that? No regional public transportation.
Thank you.
All right, so this was taken to, not so much numbers, but just the collaboration process to TPO-TAC on Tuesday. And want to take it to CBTA Finance Committee. and then take it to most likely the June CBTA. So we'll go to the on Tuesday for the first approval. But similar to the past ones that you've seen, kind of more or less 4 or 5 bullet points as far as focus. First thing is just making sure at minimum, we are keeping the level of service we have today. Second thing is prioritizing the return of transit operations to pre-pandemic service levels. And we did some projections so being optimistic, we just told the development committee that we will hopefully make it there by this time next year. And we're thinking we'll make it even beyond the 280 that we had originally wanted to budget for, or had budgeted for, kind of the goal. We'll get into some other things, but as far as we have also implemented not just doing one class, because it just seemed like we are going to keep treading water with those numbers. So now we have implemented 2 classes a month. So at minimum, bringing on 20 to kind of compensate for that retention issue, which we're also addressing. We had a meeting this morning that we talked to you guys about later.
Are we getting applications to support 2 classes?
Absolutely.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah, we needed to probably make that trip. I didn't realize we were getting enough applications to support 2 classes. I thought that's probably why we're doing one a month.
That is not the reason. I think it's just how we had been doing it.
It's fantastic. I mean,
Yeah, that's important.
that's exactly what we're talking about. I mean, that'll really propose.
Yeah.
Maybe
We
a
had-
change in the leadership, change some thought processes. I don't know.
100%. It's a culture. It's a culture that we're talking about. That's fantastic too.
It is, that's great.
The amount you put in, now you're gonna get out. The formula has not changed.
And also, we took a bus up to the Tyson's Chicken, and we got 75 applications from that, so we're just reading that process. So we had 6 start on, this past Monday, we have another class in which we're working right now, with about 12 of those that might start on the 24th. We will do the
Well,
class.
When something closes, it does present an opportunity. Kudos for you to recognize that and go recruit people that needed an opportunity.
As soon as I saw that, we use our contact.
That was a fantastic idea. Good job.
Yeah, those don't even include the numbers of those applicants yet, because they stay up until May, right?
Yeah, they actually made one of their 7
May
specials.
16th,
But some of them have started applying already, so I know part of the interviews from Monday, they had 2 places. But we had like 7 interviews, Monday 6, and then all this week we had interviews.
Yeah.
That's
So
great.
the 12 might be 20.
Yeah.
That'd be
So very, very exciting, yeah. So yeah, optimistic that we will get those numbers so we can at least put service back to what it was before. Again, similar to last year, capital requirement match where we're required to have 4% local match for most of our grants, 50% of that, so 2% of the total amount we're seeing could come from CBTA funds. So with that recommendation, it's about $500,000 to match our 22 million for this year. And then 2 additional studies, one being the micro transit, where we've identified the pilots in the first phase, and we're currently working through the refining of the zones so that we can implement with the first one, most likely being the Route 93 replacement in Henrico in September, October timeframe. And then from there, we're kind of getting the other 4 in by probably this time next year is the goal. But after we announced the pilot ones at CBTA, others came up and said, well, what's next? What's next? So you want to
That's
keep them.
because some of them wanted to be in the pilot that didn't get in there. and
Yeah.
They're making a lot of noise at CVTA to get an opportunity to have some kind of park and ride type facility.
Yeah.
And they're definitely making a lot of noise about that.
Okay, yeah, we have TPO policy similar at that meeting as well. So we are supposed to be doing a presentation soon to kind of, that's fine, we'll collaborate, see what we can do. There's a lot of resourceful other funding opportunities to kind of make that happen.
We just have other jurisdictions that are paying into CVTA, and with the portion that goes to GRTC, they're saying, hey, what about us? And I mean, we had to have drivers and everything else to be able to do it, but I know that there are other jurisdictions that are saying, hey, what about us? So they're getting pressure. That's why they're
Yeah.
probably going to be putting it on us.
Yeah, well, Powhatan, New Kent, and Hanover and Ashland are all in the pilot. So we have
I
the rules.
think Goochland
Which one is not in the pilot? Yeah, they
Right,
did. They're the ones that
They're
asked.
squeaking really loud.
They're the ones that
like
came up
they-
to me at the end of the meeting.
Yeah, and they are gonna keep on making a lot of noise. Not that, they have they're one of 9
Yeah.
jurisdictions, but they are definitely gonna continue to make some noise until they get something.
I think the high priority Goochland zone was in the Henrico short pump zone, so it was a combo that wasn't identified as ready yet.
Yeah, the Broad Street corridor of Gooch, that would make sense, and it's within reach. That's the feasible next spot.
So the recommendation is for that to do a phase 3 study to just continue that effort for about $200,000. The next one, we are working on our transit strategic plan right now, and that will encompass the FY25 plan. No need to kind of do the work, but we are recommending, if it's needed, for $50,000 to go towards the support of that plan. If we do further enhancement, that is more regionally specific.
I
Also,
don't think he has.
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So also included in here, I have a table, which is a very similar table to the one I also handed out. The one that I handed out has dollars on it. There are, I'm gonna highlight 4 priorities in FY24 for extension that, like I said, I'm optimistic that we will be able to do expansion in FY24. But none of these at this point are we asking for CBTA dollars. They did come from the collaboration with them. The first one being the Chesterfield extension down to Lothian Turnpike to Walmart Way. Chesterfield actually applied for demo grants for that with the state. So that does not
So
require
it's already
CBTA
funded,
funds,
yeah.
already funded. The 3B, I just talked to Barb, she wasn't sure when that was gonna happen. So at this point, just saying TBD. And then talking to Todd and the meeting for this as well, the Broken Parham high priority that we talked about, of course, in the board supervisors meeting as well. For Henrico, we are going to look at doing another, maybe a mid-cycle trip program grant for that, to see if we couldn't get some funds and not use CBTA or operating for this year. So that most likely is this fall that will apply. So if that does happen, he said he was going to go back and talk to everyone to see if the spring would be okay for that extension. But leaving them on here, just so you can kind of see the spectrum of projects and going all the way up to 28. Gonna finish this up before I shift the dollar portion of that. So the total amount requested for CBTA dollars for this year is 23.6 million, adding up the operations, the capital match, the 2 studies, one for microtransit and then just to support the TSP. The total expected according to VDOT and then according to John, as he tells us the numbers monthly, is about 33.1 million by the end of June for this year. And if you remember, we used the money that's accrued from the year before to pay for the next fiscal year to make sure we have enough. So about 9.5 million is recommended to go into the reserve for CBTA for when we actually do utilize it for expansion. And then the estimated amount for FY24 is 34.2 million. And that is recommended to go into reserve until we come back next year. The new plan that will break out the use.
What was that last piece?
The 34.2 million.
That's for replacement of all CVTA funds, project 34.
For next year, yeah, for GRTC next year. So 33.1 this year, 33 point, was it 34.2 next year?
Gotcha. So you're estimating 24 million to fund those projects, about 9 left over. Is that unrestricted that much? You can use it for expansion, but you can use it for salaries, you can use it for any type of venture, it has to be restricted by that.
It's restricted until we say we have a recommendation, recommended use for it.
But you can
But
use
you can
it.
use it, yeah. it's
Yeah,
just-
so that's just part of this whole reserve we're talking about, right? The surplus reserve that we're gonna put away, this reserve that we're gonna put away. You can use that once you get it. But expansion is also hiring drivers and paying. That's a huge piece of it.
So that's a nice pivot to this conversation here. Since we kind of touched on this before and talked about a little bit about, I guess, allocation model, but what this shows you is everything on that list. And it's very, very planning level cost estimates to go with it. And I went ahead and threw on some other things that we're working on now, knowing, I mean, they're not that far off. FY27, we're talking about extending to Brook and Perrin, potentially 2 additional full stations. And then FY 28, that's really aggressive, but doing a north-south, and that's a pretty aggressive amount. That's like a 13, 15 mile expansion, but 11.2 million. These are all the operating costs for raw. Altogether, these are $38 million. So at one point in time, they could exist at, basically that's a huge increase in operating costs for service for it. And you mentioned the 5 million now, the 9 million that we put away.
Yep.
John is being as creative as possible to continue to grow it through interest, which is much needed to keep it sustainable. But just want to start the conversation that we are going to bring forward kind of in May, when John brings the full budget, kind of some scenarios. If we were to spend the reserve, meaning as money came in for not necessarily even the reserve, but expansion, a certain amount, so let's say 9 million again, is that amount that we want to put towards expansion. But we know that it's going to increase 3 to 4% each year anyway, with inflation. So that gets eaten up pretty fast. How much can we expand? What are the priorities? And maybe there's another factor in here. Just like the way CBTA was put in place, we all reduced, well, the jurisdictions reduced their budget by 50%. Do we discuss maybe a match comes back if there's expansion? Maybe it's 20%, depending on what it is, or whatever the conversation is with the board. Come up with a proposal to basically see if we did all CBTA dollars, if we did some sort of match, how far could the dollars go sustainably as we implement these services. We will continue to look at operating fund supplements, just like the demo grant, just like the I-64 funds, but they all have finite amounts that go with them, and they have matches. So it's a lot, $40
When
million.
you say planning cost estimate, is that all in? Is that, I mean, if we were to run the 3B extension to Breakpoint to Coburn, that would add 200,000 to your annual budget. That takes care of the equipment, the driver, the whole, that's what it costs a year to do that.
Correct.
So if we were to run service up Route 1, to compare them to, let's say, a new arena.
But which is gonna be necessary at some.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. The VCC one is even before it, but it's sad that it's just geography, it's further, but 1.2 million, you believe that you can run service to Brook and Parent. Drivers, hiring, marketing, buses, maintenance, that's just your all-in number.
Yes, this is all operating as far as buses. Yes, that would include the mileage for the buses, but we even have enough buses at this point, basically, probably to make it through FY 26.
That's awesome. That's a great tool, because then as we're dealing with those reserves and you prioritize these, that's a fantastic.
Well, and some of these
3.2
may
million.
jump over another one because they're ready to move forward, where something else isn't quite ready to move forward yet.
If you had the staffing to do all 4 of those priorities in 24, if you had the staffing, you had the equipment, right? You had the staffing, and the board so desires, 3.2 million bucks, we need to go in the budget for that. That's basically what you're saying.
Even less, well, we just talked about the Chesterfield one's already paid for, because that's coming from a grant from.
I'm
state.
sorry, I misread. That's the
Yeah.
1-year demo grant. So,
Right, the other
so
two,
3.2 is needed, but 1.7 is already paid for.
correct.
So you would ask for 1.5 in the budget if the board would say all 3 of those. You have the drivers, you have the drivers. All right, let's go. You'd say 1.5 in budget, escalating at 3-4%, whatever. every year.
Yeah. And we'll bring that to like each of the, it's by fiscal year, so we'll include those expansion miles and the cost for the May meeting. So you can see what that does to the budget as well.
This planning is why it's so important to continue to put those reserves away. So we
Yes.
can execute these things as necessary when the drivers get home down.
Even though the Chesterfield grant, how long is that for?
That's a 1-year
1 year,
demo,
so
yeah.
That's 1 year. So
Yeah, and they're
you're
being
after
pretty
that.
stringent on that, stringent on that.
Doesn't that have a possibility for renewal if it meets certain criteria?
I'm not sure.
I thought it did, maybe I'm wrong.
And that's the thing that, we keep in mind, obviously, the year 2, you don't say 25, you want to add 3, 4, 5, 6 million of those priorities, but you still have the 3.2.
Yeah.
Right,
That's
because
yeah.
all of these could technically operate as a
Sustainable number.
reoccurring cost.
Yeah,
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Sustainable number.
Correct,
Makes
correct.
perfect sense.
Yes. Right. Like I said, so those are not any sort of costs related. Those are not going to the board at this time. But just for you guys to know that they will be costs as we do get the drivers. But when
I
we-
would say,
when we will
though,
have the
like,
drivers.
if they were to have their, facility open up it would be imperative that people could get there by bus.
And that's why-
That just is, so we'd have to figure out how to.
You're talking about 24, 25 even with a little delay. I mean, the arena opens 26. We had a conversation last week about Magellan Parkway, about adding that connector over 95. It comes from Route 1, so it's not just Barron Road that accesses the property. Magellan Parkway is that bridge that comes over. And we asked that question and the answer was 25. It lines up before you start putting so many people in the grid. So
Yeah, and that's where the number came from, to align with that Bridgewater. Great, and we have enough now, that's for,
So this will come Tuesday.
this piece will, not this piece.
not.
We go back to number one, which is approved draft minutes. Has everybody had a chance to read the minute? Any corrections? Motion to approve.
I would just make a note, I wasn't here, but I read them and I feel confident that's what.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Uh,
Number four, closed session.
Yeah, I got that. I move that GRTC's Board of Directors Finance Committee hold a closed meeting pursuant to section 2.23711A1 of the Code of Virginia for the discussion and consideration of personnel matter concerning Greater Richmond Transit Company.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
should be good enough. 10:30 to make what we should be fine.
Whereas the GRTC Board of Directors Finance Committee is convening a closed meeting on the state pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote in accordance with provisions of Virginia Freedom of Information Act, whereas section 2.2 3712 Code of Virginia requires certification by the board that such a closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved, this board hereby certifies to the best of each member's knowledge that one, only public matters lawfully exempt from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certifying resolution applies, and two, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the board. Witnessed by the affirmative vote of the following: Jim Engel.
Aye.
Dan Schmidt, aye. Tara Nelson.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
All right, other business.
So the other business item is that we prepared the title of GRTC and RideFinders Corporate Bank Resolution Revision. So basically what this is that for the GRTC corporate bank accounts, which are Wells Fargo, as well as our LGIP investment accounts, currently Cheryl and myself are the only two authorized signers on there. So we're adding Adrian on there. And then on the RideFinders side of the house for their corporate bank accounts, which are at True East Bank, currently Cheryl and myself and Von Tisdale are the only authorized signers. So we're adding Adrian to that. So the resolution, which we'll put through the consent agenda, is that we're going to add Adrian into the mix for those at this point, and we'll come back once we hire a controller and add the controller. But right now it's just Cheryl and myself for GRTC, so.
And we got some good candidates for the controller position, so we're on to second
Next
round
Wednesday, yeah.
interview, so hopefully we'll have that person on board too.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, we're good. It's good work all the way around.
Is it a motion for this?
Do we need a motion?
Uh,
This would be the consent.
Because it's going to the board, yeah.
It's going to,
It's going-
it's addressed to the.
For the
board.
bank resolution one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Is it on the
moved.
consent agenda or-
It will be.
Second, all in favor? All right. Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
So, it does definitely seem like this team right here seems to be gelling very well. Are we off?
Joe, can you turn it off? Have him turn it on.